Okay, so let's dive into something pretty cool today. It's called MDCrow. Well, imagine, you're a researcher and you're trying to understand how a protein folds, or how a drug interacts with a virus, or maybe even like how to design a brand new material. You'd probably use something called molecular dynamics simulations, MD simulations. And these simulations are really powerful. They can show us how atoms and molecules move and interact over time, but they can also be a real pain to actually set up and run.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, traditionally, MD simulations, they needed a lot of specialized knowledge, right? And a lot of like manual tweaking, and frankly, a lot of patience.
Yeah, so what if you had like an AI assistant, something that could take care of all the heavy lifting for you?
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Right. Well, that's where MD Crow comes in, right? It's basically like having a personal AI scientist. And it can't just run your MD simulations. I mean, it can actually understand what you're trying to achieve and sort of guide the whole process in an intelligent way.
Yeah, and what makes MDCrow so special is that it acts like an agent. So it's not just passively following instructions. It's actually using something called chain of thought reasoning to break down these really complex tasks into smaller steps, much like a human researcher would do, actually.
So it's like it's actually thinking through the process, figuring out what needs to be done, and then doing it.
Exactly. And to do this, it has this amazing toolbox of over 40 specialized tools. Some of these tools help it pull information from databases, like Uniprot, which is this huge library of protein data. And then others allow it to, manipulate protein structures, set up and run the actual simulations, and then very importantly, analyze all of the data that comes out of that.
Wait, so it can actually go and read scientific papers to figure out the best way to run a simulation.
It can.
That's incredible.
There's this tool called Paper QA, and it allows MDCrow to actually go through PDFs of research articles and pull out the relevant information. Imagine you need to simulate a protein in a specific solvent. MDCrow can scan through tons of research to find the best parameters. It's like having an instant research assistant who never gets tired of reading.
Oh my gosh, that alone would save researchers so much time. But how do we know MD Crow is actually any good at this? I mean, can it really compete with a human expert?
Well, the developers actually put it through a pretty rigorous test. They designed 25 tasks, and some were simple, and then some were really, really complex and had MDCrow tackle them. And the results were pretty impressive.
Let me guess, it passed with flying colors.
Well, when they used really powerful large language models, or LLMs as they're called, specifically GPT-4o and Llama 3 405B, MDCrow was able to successfully complete 72% of the tasks.
72%. That's incredible, especially given like how complex some of these MD workflows are.
It is, and what's even more interesting is they also did these robustness experiments. So they threw increasingly difficult tasks at MDCrow, and they even changed how the instructions were phrased. And both GPT-4o and Llama 3 405B continued to perform really well. So this means that it can handle some ambiguity, and it can adapt to different communication styles, which is really important for any AI system that's going to work with humans.
So it's not just a one-trick pony, it's adaptable and robust. But let's be honest, even the most advanced AI isn't going to be perfect. What are some of the limitations of MD Crow? Where does it fall short?
You're right, it's still early days for this technology. Right now, MDCrow is mostly focused on proteins, common solvents, and specific force fields. It hasn't really been tested with small molecule force fields, which are important for things like drug design.
So it's kind of a protein specialist for now, but with room to grow into other areas.
Exactly. And while it can handle a lot, there are still some complex situations where it might need a bit of human guidance.
So it's not about replacing humans, it's more about giving them like a superpowered assistant to help them do better research.
Exactly. Think of it as a collaborative tool.
Okay, that's reassuring. But I have to ask, if MD Crow can already do all of this, what's next? What are the researchers working on now?
Well, one obvious area is expanding MDCrow's capabilities beyond proteins. So being able to simulate small molecules would open up a world of possibilities in drug discovery and material science.
That makes sense. What else?
Well, they're also looking at improving MBCrow's chatting ability. Right now, you can have like basic conversations with it to clarify instructions, but imagine being able to have a real back and forth, like asking it why it made a particular decision or getting it to explain its reasoning in a way that's easy to understand.
That would be incredible. It would be like having a real conversation with a colleague, not just like issuing commands to a computer.
Exactly. And finally, there's the whole issue of making MDCrow easier to use. Right now, you need some Coho knowledge to really tap into its potential. They're working on creating user-friendly interfaces so that any scientist can use it regardless of their coding skills.
This is all incredibly promising. It sounds like MDCrow has the potential to, like, revolutionize how we do research. But before we get carried away with all the exciting possibilities, let's take a closer look at, like, the nuts and bolts of how it all works.
Yes, let's delve into the architecture, the specific tools, and the different types of LLMs that power MDCrow's intelligence.
Perfect. Let's continue our deep dive into MDCrow and see just what makes this AI agent tick.
So welcome back to our deep dive into MDCrow.
All right, so we've talked about MDCrow being able to, like, think like a scientist, breaking down these complex tasks and using all of these, like, cool tools. What's the brain behind all of it?
Well, that brain is a large language model, or LLM. So these LLMs, they're trained on massive amounts of text data. And this allows them to understand and generate human-like text. They can translate languages and even answer questions, in a really informative way.
So like those AI chatbots that can like write poems or summarize news articles. But I imagine MDCrow needs something a bit more specialized, right? Not just any LLM can handle like complex scientific concepts.
You're absolutely right. While some general-purpose LLM can be surprisingly good with science, the creators of MDCrow focus on models that were either specifically designed for scientific tasks or fine-tuned using like tons and tons of scientific data.
Okay, so what kind of LLMs are we talking about here? Any familiar names?
Yeah, they actually tested MDCrow with a bunch of different LLMs, including some familiar ones like GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4. They also tried out some llama models like Llama 3 7DB and Llama 3 405B.
The llama models. Those are the open source ones, right?
Yeah.
So even researchers who don't have access to like the really big expensive models can still experiment with MDCrow.
Precisely. Using open source models like the Llama family really opens up access to this technology, and it encourages collaboration in the research community. They also experimented with some Claude models, which are known for their reasoning abilities.
Oh, that's fantastic. So a whole buffet of LLMs to choose from, but which one came out on top?
Well, based on their tests, GPT-4o was the MVP, achieving a 72% success rate on those 25 MD tasks we talked about earlier.
Impressive. But I'm curious about that Llama 3 405B model. It did almost as well, right?
It did, yeah. Llama 3 405B got a 68% success rate, which is amazingly close to GPT-4o, especially given that it's an open source model.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. It shows that open source AI is really catching up. You mentioned earlier that both GPT-4o and Llama 3 405B were really robust. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, remember how we discussed MDCrow being able to handle instructions that are phrased differently and how it could even handle more complex tasks? Both of those models, they maintain their high performance even when things got harder. So this really proves they're not just good at following like rigid rules. They can also adapt to more realistic scenarios.
That's really encouraging. So the brain of MDCrow is certainly powerful. But you mentioned before that the LLMs are only part of the story. MDCrow's real power comes from how it integrates those LLMs with its tool set.
Exactly. Let's dive into that toolbox a bit further. You can think of it as four main categories. So you have information retrieval, PDB, and protein handling, simulation, and analysis.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these categories.
Okay, let's start with information retrieval. So these tools are all about MDCrow gathering knowledge before it actually starts any simulations. It's like doing background research before starting an experiment.
So MDCrow hits the books first. Interesting. What does that actually look like?
Well, one key tool here is the UniProt API wrapper. So UniProt is this massive database. It's packed with information about proteins, their functions, their structures, interactions, and much more.
So if you tell MDCrow to simulate, say, the insulin protein, it can first go to UniProt and learn everything about its structure and function, maybe even its evolutionary history.
Precisely. It can gather all sorts of helpful information that will come in handy when setting up and understanding the simulations. And then there's that paper QA tool we mentioned.
The one that reads scientific papers, I'm still amazed by that.
Yeah, it's a really powerful tool. So paper QA lets MDCrow dig through this local database of PEFs. So essentially allowing it to scan through research papers and find things like the best parameters for simulating a specific protein, or even insights into a particular biological process.
It's like having an AI research assistant that can read and understand scientific papers at warp speed.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the PDB and protein tools. These tools are all about prepping protein structure, so getting them ready for those simulations.
So this is where MDCrow gets hands-on with the actual 3D models of the proteins.
Right. A critical tool here is PDB Fixer. So it cleans up and prepares PDB files, which is the standard format for storing information about the 3D structures of proteins.
Those are the files that contain the coordinates of all the atoms in a protein, right? But sometimes those files can be, like, messy or incomplete.
That's right. So PDB Fixer comes in and handles things like missing atoms or incorrect bonds or any inconsistencies in the structure. Think of it as a digital cleaning crew, making sure the protein structure is pristine before it enters the simulation.
So it's making sure that the data is squeaky clean before starting the experiment. Smart. What else can MDCrow do in this stage?
Well, it can also fetch PDB files for both small molecules and proteins, meaning it can work with a variety of molecular systems. And it has tools for visualizing those PDB files, so using platforms like Molstar and NGLView.
So it can create those beautiful interactive 3D models that scientists love to use.
Exactly. And those visualizations are not just pretty, they're super useful for understanding how proteins are structured and how they move.
This is all very impressive, but I'm ready to get to the heart of the matter. Tell me about the simulation tools.
Now we're getting to the exciting part. This is where the virtual experiments actually happen. All of MDCrow's simulation tools rely on OpenMM. So this is a powerful open source molecular dynamics engine, and it's known for its speed and accuracy, and its ability to handle a wide range of simulations, from simple systems to complex biomolecules.
So OpenMM is doing the heavy lifting of calculating all the molecular interactions, and MDCrow is the one calling the shots.
That's a great way to put it. MDCrow basically sets up all the parameters for the simulation. So things like temperature, pressure, what kind of solvent the protein is in, and how long the simulation should run. And then it lets OpenM take over and actually run the simulation.
I imagine that's not as simple as just like plugging in random numbers, right? MDCrow needs to choose those parameters carefully based on the specific protein and the research question.
Absolutely. And this is where integrating those powerful LLMs with expert design tools really pays off. MDCrow can use its knowledge base, its reasoning abilities, and even access scientific literature to figure out the best parameters for a given simulation.
So it's not just blindly running simulations, it's actually making smart decisions based on scientific understanding.
That's exactly right. And here's another cool thing. MDCrow's simulation tools are designed to handle any errors that might pop up during a simulation.
Wait, it can troubleshoot problems on its own.
It can.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So it can spot problems with the parameters, issues with earlier preparation steps, or even missing force field templates. And then it takes action to get the simulation back on track.
It's like having a super smart lab partner who can like anticipate and fix problems before they even become a big deal.
Yeah, it's a level of automation and intelligence that we haven't seen before in MD simulations. Okay, so MDCrow has gathered the information, prepped the protein structure, and run the simulation without any major hiccups. What happens next?
That's a great question. What happens to all the data?
That's where the analysis tools come in. This is where MDCrow really shines, turning all that raw simulation data into useful information. So those simulations, they generate mountains of data. It would be incredibly difficult and time-consuming to analyze all of that manually.
Yeah, I can imagine. What does MDCrow use to tackle that?
Well, MDCrow uses MDTraj, which is a Python library that was made for analyzing MD trajectories.
So MDCrow's is like MDCrow's data analysis sidekick. I like it.
Exactly. So with MDTraj, MDCrow can calculate a bunch of different metrics. For example, it can measure root, mean squared deviation, or RMSD, to see how much a protein is wiggling around. It can also calculate the radius of gyration, which tells you how compact the protein is. And it can even figure out the solvent accessible surface area, or SASA, to see how much of the protein is exposed to the surrounding environment.
Wow, those are all really important measures for understanding how a protein behaves. Anything else?
Yeah, MDCrow can also analyze the protein's secondary structure, so looking at features like alpha helices and beta sheets. It can even do more complicated analyses, like principal component analysis, or PCA, to identify the most important ways the protein is moving.
So it's not just giving you numbers, it's actually like providing insights into how the protein is behaving.
You got it. And it can even create visualizations of these analyses, making it easier for researchers to understand and interpret the result.
This is starting to paint a picture of like a seriously powerful and versatile research tool. But I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. MDCrow's ability to chat with researchers.
Yes, the interactive element is one of the coolest things about MDCrow. It's not just this black box that you feed instructions into. It's something that you can have a conversation with. You can clarify what you want it to do, get feedback, and even guide it through tasks that it might not have been explicitly programmed to handle.
So it's like a real-time collaboration with like an AI research partner.
Exactly. The developers built in this chatting feature to make it more user-friendly and adaptable, and even capable of learning new things. Remember the example with the annealing simulation?
Where they got MDCrow to run a simulation it wasn't initially designed to do.
That's the one. They were able to make it happen by talking to MDCrow, giving it like clearer instructions and some guidance on how to tweak the existing simulation code. It really shows how much potential there is for humans and AI to work together, and how MDCrow can learn and improve over time.
That's amazing. Okay, so we've talked about MDCrow's brain, those powerful LLMs, and we've looked at its amazing toolbox. But can you give me like an example of how all of this comes together in a real-world scenario?
Absolutely. Let's say a researcher wants to study how stable a protein called lysozyme is at different temperatures. So this is a pretty standard task in MD simulations, and it's something that MDCrow can handle easily.
All right, I'm following. So where would MDCrow start?
Well, first, it would use its information retrieval tools to learn a bit about lysozyme. It might go to Unicrod to learn about its structure, its function, and any existing data on its stability at different temperatures.
So again, it's doing its homework before jumping into the experiment.
Right. It needs a solved base of knowledge to make good decisions about the simulation parameters.
Makes sense. What happens next?
Well, once MDCrow has gathered enough information, it moves on to the PDB and protein tools. So it grabs a PDB file for lysozyme, which has all the 3D coordinates of its atoms, and then it uses PDB Fixer to clean up the structure, making sure there are no missing atoms or problems.
So it's making sure the protein model is ready to go before running the simulation.
Exactly. You need good data to get good results. Now, MDCrow hands it off to its simulation tools, so it uses OpenMM to set up the environment for the simulation, choosing the right force field to describe the interactions between atoms, a water model to simulate the protein's natural surroundings, and it sets the temperature to what the researcher wants.
So it's like creating a virtual test tube where it can like test lysozyme at different temperature.
Precisely. And it can even run several simulations at the same time, say at 25 degrees Celsius, 37 degrees Celsius, and 50 degrees Celsius, to see how lysozyme stability changes across that range.
That's super efficient. But what about analyzing all of those simulations?
Here come the analysis tools. MDCrow uses MDTraj to calculate different metrics like that RMSD, radius of gyration, and SOSA we talked about for each simulation. And these measurements give insights into how the different temperatures are affecting the structure and movements of lysozyme.
So it can tell how much the protein is wiggling, how compact it is, and how much of its surface area is exposed at each temperature.
That's right. And it can create visualizations of all of this, like graphs or even animations to make it easier to see the trends and differences between those simulations.
So MDCrow doesn't just run the simulations, it also analyzes the results and presents them in a way that's easy to understand. It's like having a whole research team wrapped up in one AI package.
It really is. It takes care of everything from start to finish, giving researchers more time to focus on what the results actually mean.
This is really impressive. It sounds like MDCrow has the potential to change how we approach research. But before we get too carried away, I want to acknowledge that no technology is perfect. What are some limitations we need to be aware of?
That's a fair point. While MDCrow is very advanced, it's still under development, and it's important to be realistic about what it can and cannot do.
Right. So let's talk about some of those areas where MDCrow could be improved and what challenges still lie ahead for this kind of AI in science.
Well, one area for improvement, as we mentioned earlier, is expanding MDCrow's capabilities beyond proteins. Right now, it's primarily focused on proteins, common solvents, and specific force fields. It hasn't been extensively tested with small molecule force fields, which are really important for studying things like how drugs bind to targets.
So it's a bit of a protein specialist for now, but it could be even more versatile if it could handle other types of molecules.
Exactly. And while it can handle a lot of different tasks, there might still be some really complex situations where it needs a little help from a human expert.
So again, it's not about replacing human researchers, but about giving them a really powerful assistant to help them do better research.
Precisely. It's all about collaboration. And remember how we talked about MDCrow being able to handle instructions phrased in different ways and how it can adapt to more complex tasks.
Yes, its adaptability is impressive, but I'm sure there are limits to how much ambiguity it can handle. The human language can be very nuanced and context dependent.
You are absolutely right. Even though MDCrow has shown it can handle different phrasings and levels of complexity, there's definitely room for improvement when it comes to understanding natural language. Making it even better at understanding complex instructions and subtle nuances in language would be a big step forward.
That makes sense. What are some other areas for improvement?
Another area is transparency and explainability. Right now, MDCrow can give you results and insights, but it's not always clear how it arrived at those conclusions.
Right, it's like a black box that spits out answers without showing its work.
Exactly. If we can find ways to make MDCrow's decision-making process more transparent, it'll increase trust in its results and make it easier for researchers to double-check its findings.
That's super important for any AI that's used in science where things need to be, rigorous and reproducible.
Absolutely. And lastly, there's the issue of integrating MDCrow into the way scientists already work. It's great to have this amazing tool, but it needs to fit seamlessly into existing research workflows.
So it's not enough to just have the tool. It needs to be easy for scientists to use in their day-to-day work.
Exactly. A lot of work is being done to create user-friendly interfaces and platforms that make it easy for researchers to work with MDCrow and use its power without needing to be, coding experts.
So making this technology accessible to everyone, regardless of their coding skills or how powerful their computers are.
That's the goal. Making this kind of AI-powered tool more widely available is essential for speeding up scientific discoveries and encouraging more collaboration and research.
This has been a really fascinating look at MDCrow. We've covered how it works, what it can do, how it might be used, and even where it could improve.
It really is an incredible system, and I'm excited to see how it might shape the future of research. But before we wrap up completely, I think it's important to take a step back and consider the bigger picture. What does the creation of MDCrow tell us about the future of scientific research itself?
That's a great point. Let's shift gears and discuss the broader implications of MDCrow and what it means for the future of science. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about like the nuts and bolts of MDCrow. The LLMs, the tools, the simulations. But I think it's time to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture here. What does the development of MDCrow tell us about the future of scientific research?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I think MDCrow is kind of a sign of a big change in how we approach scientific discovery. We're seeing AL becoming more than just a tool. It's becoming like a collaborator, a partner in pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
So it's not just about like automating tasks. It's about AI systems that can actually reason and learn and even like come up with their own insights.
Exactly. MDCrow is a perfect example of this. It doesn't just, blindly follow instructions. It thinks through the process, it makes decisions, and it even adapts to unexpected situations, a lot like a human researcher would.
That's really exciting, but also a little bit daunting, right? The idea that AI systems might one day be making scientific discoveries on their own.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about, and it's natural to have mixed feelings about it. But I think it's important to remember that AI is at its core a tool, and what it does for science depends on how we choose to use it.
That's a really good point. It's up to us, the human researchers, to guide this technology and to make sure that it's used for good and that it's used responsibly.
Absolutely. AI systems like MDCrow have the potential to really boost our abilities, to speed up research and help us tackle problems that seemed impossible before. But they shouldn't replace human intuition, creativity, and critical thinking.
So it's not about humans versus machines. It's about humans and machines working together to solve the mysteries of the universe.
I like that. MDCrow gives us a glimpse of that future where AI and human researchers work hand in hand, each contributing their unique strengths. It's a future full of possibilities, but it also demands careful thought. As AI becomes more integrated into research, we need to be aware of its limitations, its potential biases, and the ethical implications of its use.
That's a really important point. We need to have open conversations about the role of AI in science to make sure that it's used responsibly and that it benefits everyone.
I couldn't agree more. Education and open dialogue are essential for navigating this new territory.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into MDCrow. It's been a fascinating journey exploring this game-changing technology. I hope our listeners are as excited as we are about the future of AI in science.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
And as always, we encourage you to keep learning, ask questions, and be part of the conversation about AI and its impacts on the world. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.